What's up, everyone? It's Josh over here with the Manchise, coming back at you with another UFC Fight Night breakdown. This weekend's card is headlined by Anthony Smith versus Alexander Rakic. This fight card shaping up to be pretty solid. I will be honest, especially compared to last week, where again it was just another debacle. A lot of short notice fighters had to take fights because fights were dropping off. I mean, the co-main event was scrapped last minute. Ovince St. Preux ended up testing positive for COVID. With all of that being said, man, I had an okay week when it comes to DFS. I certainly didn't profit any money. I didn't really lose any money either. Maria Agapova really is what killed me. That prevented me from having a big week. I basically broke even. This week, though, with Anthony Smith versus Alexander Rakic, let's keep our fingers crossed. Let's hope that these fights stay together. I know that we've had some adjustments to some of the fights on here. We're going to talk about those today. Hopefully we can exploit those from a DFS standpoint. That way you guys can get the most out of my video. There's nothing that makes me more angry than when I make a video and then, 3 days later, half of my input has to be scrapped, especially when it comes to DFS, because fights are being rearranged and things are being changed up. Outside of the Agapova, who really is the biggest favorite to ever lose a fight in the UFC, it's pretty money on a lot of my calls last week, man. Frankie Edgar took the dub. I loved him in DraftKings at that low 7,000 price point. I really liked Joe Selecki. I liked Daniel Rodriguez. So it was a decent week. But let's make some money this week. And like the previous couple videos, we're going to start with the main event, which is of course happening in the light heavyweight division. Anthony Lionheart Smith versus Alexander Rakic. Hey, let's go over some stats right off the bat here. Let's go over some stats for this fight. We'll start with Anthony Smith, who's got a record of 33-15. He is coming off of a pretty tough loss to Glover Teixeira. Striking, 3.19 significant strikes landed per minute, 46% striking accuracy, 4.57 strikes absorbed. When it comes to Alexander Rakic, 12-2 professional record. Lost his most recent fight to Özdemir. That was a really close one. That fight could have gone either way. That's his only loss in the UFC thus far, but 5.17 strikes landed per minute, 52% striking accuracy, 2.41 strikes absorbed. And when it comes to grappling, I think Rakic has an edge here as well. 1.2 takedowns per 15 minutes for Rakic, 28% takedown accuracy, not great, 88% takedown defense, which is solid and should come in use in this fight. For Anthony Smith, 0.45 takedowns per 15 minutes, 27% takedown accuracy, 51% takedown defense. So let's look at Anthony Smith real quick. I mean, when it comes to Anthony Smith, his last fight, which just took place 3 months ago, he came out looking pretty solid, especially from a striking perspective against Glover Teixeira. Glover ate some big shots, but he was able to just keep in the fight, and Anthony Smith started to gas, and Glover Teixeira took advantage of him, really out-grappled him, dominated in the clinch, and then got Smith in the later rounds on the ground and just absolutely mauled him. It's one of those fights where some people were like, hey, it should have been called earlier, and I get that. I mean, I think Anthony Smith lost multiple teeth in that fight. And they're wearing mouth guards, man. I mean, Glover Teixeira absolutely rocked him. So it's a pretty quick turnaround, and that concerns me. But before that fight, he did sub Alexander Gustafsson, which is pretty impressive. He had that title fight against John Jones, went the distance, but never really was threatening in that fight. And then he also has a submission victory against Volkan Özdemir and a knockout over Shogun Rua. I mean, Anthony Smith, UFC veteran at this point. He's fought in multiple divisions, fought at 185, really found a nice home here at 205. He's got notable victories over guys like Rashad Evans, Hector Lombard. His losses, we've just mentioned John Jones, go over to Sherry. He's also lost to Thiago Santos, lost to Cesar Ferreira. Anthony Smith's a solid fighter, but I don't think he's an elite fighter. He's pretty well-rounded, right? He's long, lanky, 6'4", 76-inch reach, good striking, pretty solid submission skills as well. But he's going up against a hot prospect in Alexander Rakic, and Rakic had a ton of steam going into that fight against Volkan Oezdemir. And again, he lost that fight split decision, but before that, 4 UFC victories in a row, right? So he beat Francimar Barroso, he beat Justin Ledet, he finished Devin Clark, he finished Jimmy Manuwa in seconds. So this is a guy that's got some power and really good striking abilities. And you couple that with his high takedown defense percentage at 88%, and it makes me hard. It makes it hard. It doesn't make me hard. Maybe it does. No, I'm just kidding. But it makes it hard to not like him here in this spot, especially with Anthony Smith making that quick turnaround after being completely just mauled by Glover Teixeira. If this fight does get to the mat, I think that's where Anthony Smith has an advantage, but I don't know if he can take Rakic there. And how much damage can Anthony Smith take? He's now had like 50 pro fights. He's been in a bunch of wars. Rakic is the younger fighter. He's the fresher fighter. He's the better striker. Really good takedown defense. I like him here. Minus 300, it's tricky to put money on him. And actually that line's come down a bit. Rakic is now at about minus 275 for depending on your sports books. I don't know if I'd be placing a wager on this fight, but for DraftKings, I am all over Alexander Rakic. He's priced at a pretty reasonable price point this week, 8,700. And let's just look back. 43 points in that loss to Oezdemir. Again, he wins that split decision, puts up 75 points. Not bad for a fighter who is priced in the mid-8s. But before that, 101 against Manuel, 116 against Clark, 119 against Ledet. So those are the numbers that we're looking for. Those are the numbers that you're typically paying close to 9 Gs for in DraftKings. So I like Rakic. I'm going to have a ton of exposure to him. For Anthony Smith, he's solid value at 7,500, especially because this is a 5-round fight. And there is a chance, like if Anthony Smith wins this fight, I think it would come by submission. The problem with that is, though, like in his fight against Gustafsson, he put up 68 points, and that was a win where he subbed Gustafsson. So Anthony Smith hasn't been the greatest fighter in fantasy as of late. 48 against Teixeira, 68 against Gustafsson, 18 in a 5-round fight against John Jones. He had a nice little run there where he beat Hua and Evans and Oezdemir, where he scored 103, 112, 85. I'll probably end up having a little bit of exposure to Anthony Smith. I don't think this is a fight that you should stack. Like last week, Edgar versus Munoz was a good fight to stack. Now, if you stack those fights, you probably didn't win any tournaments, but you had a good chance of cashing. In cash, it was a great strategy, right? Like both of those guys put up solid amount of points because of the amount of significant strikes. But if that goes the other way, right, and let's say Munoz wins that fight and he reaches, his output or his total fantasy points kind of matches what you were paying for him, you were in a really good spot. Now, I had a lot of Edgar-only lineups, so I capitalized off of that. But for this fight, I'd stay away from the stack. I want one or the other in this fight, and I will definitely be leaning Rakic. So let's move on to the co-main event here, which is fight between Robbie Lawler, ruthless Robbie Lawler, and Neil Magny. And Robbie Lawler is, of course, taking this fight on short notice to a degree. We've known this now for a little while. Robbie Lawler, former champion, 28-14 professional record. Coming off 3 straight losses, going up against Neil Magny, 23-7. He's got his most two recent fights in the UFC as victories. He's 4-1 in his last 5 fights. We'll start off with the underdog in Robbie Lawler, who is a plus 210 underdog here. His most recent fight was a year ago against Colby Covington. That one went the distance, but Covington just pieced him up everywhere. Outstruck him, kept a lot of pressure on him, and dominated that fight. Before that, he was subbed by Ben Askren. That was a controversial fight. You know, Robbie Lawler said that at no point was he out, but the position that he was in, it just didn't look good. That bulldog choke that Ben Askren had him in, Robbie Lawler just kind of looked defenseless. So I can't blame the referee for stopping that fight. He also lost the fight to Rafael dos Anjos, another one that went the distance. I mean, his most recent victory was 3 years ago against Cowboy Cerrone. He was knocked out by Tyron Woodley 4 years ago, so he hasn't been the most active fighter. I remember watching that fight. I was at a club in Orlando. I actually left the club to stream it on my phone. Had some money on Tyron Woodley in that fight. So yeah, Robbie Lawler, he's struggled as of late. For Neil Magny, who's the favorite, again, he's minus 250 at this point. Fought 2 months ago, beat Anthony Rocco Martin. That was a fight that went the distance, but Magny really did some good work in the clinch. He also had a victory about half a year ago against the Leech, Jingliang Li. That's another one that went the distance. He was knocked out by Santiago Ponzinibbio. Also has victories over Craig White, Carlos Condit. I mean, both these guys have been in the UFC for a long time. Both these guys are really, kings of cardio. I mean, Robbie Lawler isn't on the same level that he was at one point, but that's expected. The guy's 38 years old. The thing is, Neil Magny has a lot of advantages in this fight, right? So I'm going to pull up some stats here for the Robbie Lawler-Neil Magny fight. Robbie Lawler, 3.57 significant strikes landed per minute with a 45% striking accuracy. That number's really nice. 4.16 strikes absorbed. For Magny, he matches those numbers. 3.95 strikes landed per minute, 47% accuracy. His defense is even better at only 2.17 strikes absorbed, and that makes sense because he always has a giant reach advantage over the other fighters in that 170-pound division. When it comes to grappling, Neil Magny has an advantage there as well. 2.5 takedowns per 15 minutes, 44% takedown accuracy, 58% takedown defense. Robbie Lawler, 0.71 takedowns per 15 minutes, 66% takedown accuracy, 65% takedown defense. We haven't really seen a ton of takedown attempts recently from Robbie Lawler, like in his most recent fights against Covington and Askren. He's really turned more into a brawler. I think he's going to have trouble taking down a guy like Magny who's so long. And again, Magny's cardio is probably the best in the... it's up there. It's up there with like Colby Covington when it comes to just... especially in that 170-pound division. Like, those guys can do 25 minutes like it's nothing. Magny fights out of Elevation Fight Team, right? So he trains at Elevation. It makes sense why his stamina is so good. I like Magny here because you could argue Robbie Lawler has an advantage in striking and power, but it's going to be difficult. He's giving up 4 inches in height, 6 inches in reach. He's going to really have to come inside on Magny, which is where Magny does his best work, right? Like, he wants to make it kind of a scrappy, grinding pace of a fight where he can utilize his clinch strikes and some elbows. That's where he really does well. I don't see Robbie Lawler, again, being able to take down Magny or submit Magny. That's not the style that Lawler fights with. So I like Magny here outright. Now, again, those odds have shifted. Magny's minus 250. I think it's still a pretty safe bet. It's a safer bet than betting Rakic, in my opinion. But again, not a ton of money to be made there. And when it comes to DraftKings, this fight's difficult for me because Magny, he's not a high volume, high output striker. I mean, if I'm just looking, 64 significant strikes against Martin, 74 against Lee, 72 against Ponzinibbio, 32 against Condit. He was subbed by Dos Anjos early, 50 against Johnny Hendricks. So, Maggie's not a guy that puts up a ton of fantasy points. 62 in a victory against Martin, 93 against Lee, 36 against Ponzinibbio. So, at that 8,600 price point, I like him more as an option in cash games. I don't love him in tournaments because I don't see him unless he does finish Robbie Lawler. It could happen. I don't expect it. I think this fight goes the distance. 8,600, I'm looking for a little bit more value there, a little bit more output from someone that I'm paying up for there. Especially because there's some other fights that I would prefer to target. That's something that we always talk about each week, right? Last week it was Ike Villanueva versus Jordan Wright. That was a fight that you wanted to have exposure to because you knew that there was probably going to be a finish and an early finish in that fight, and that is exactly what happened. Don't see that in this fight. Robbie Lawler at 7,600, again, 39 against Covington, 21 against Askren, 43 against Dos Anjos, 69 against Cerrone, 2 against Woodley. I don't love him. I don't love him at all when it comes to DraftKings. I don't expect to have really any Robbie Lawler exposure. So we'll go down to the next fight on the main card here, which is taking place in the 125-pound flyweight division. It's a fight for Alexa Grasso versus Ji-Yeon Kim. We'll start with Ji-Yeon Kim, who's got a record of 9-2-2. She's 3-2 in her last 5 UFC fights. She's got victories over Nadia Kassem, Melinda Fabian, and Justine Kish. For Alexa Grasso, she's 11-3. Again, she started off as a strawweight in the UFC, has now since moved up to the flyweight division. She's 2-3 in her 5 most recent fights. She's got wins over Karolina Kowalkiewicz and Randa Marcos. Some losses thrown in there against Carla Esparza, Tatiana Suarez, Felice Herrig. Alexa Grasso is a pretty big favorite in this fight at -320. It makes sense. She's definitely the better striker in this fight. Where she struggled in the UFC is against girls that could out-grapple her, right? Because Grasso has that boxing background. So, Tatiana Suarez was able to just take her to the ground and sub her. Carla Esparza, she just couldn't stop the takedowns in that fight. Ji-Yeon Kim, I want to pull up some of the stats. We'll discuss those. I want to really look at the grappling here. Ji-Yeon Kim, 0 takedowns per 15 minutes, right? So she's a striker by nature as well. That doesn't bode well for Ji-Yeon Kim in this fight against Grasso. One thing I will say is Ji-Yeon Kim is the bigger fighter. She's 2 inches taller, has a 6-inch reach advantage. But I don't think that has a huge... Grasso's just such a better striker in my opinion. She lands more significant strikes per minute, better striking accuracy, less strikes absorbed. So I like Grasso in this fight, but I would not be willing to bet Grasso at -320. Again, I've been pretty terrible with the women's MMA fights, so if anything, fade me and go with Kim here. When it comes to DraftKings, I don't want anything to do with this fight. Grasso is 9,100. Just doesn't make any sense. She's only eclipsed the 100-point mark once in her UFC career when she put up 104 against Kowalkiewicz. Outside of that, 28, 3, 70, 40, 68. Those numbers aren't good. They're not enticing. And for Ji-Yeon Kim, if I had to play someone in this fight, I would play Ji-Yeon Kim. Right, 120 points against Kassem, 17 when she lost to Antonina Shevchenko, 67 Fabian, 64 against Kish. I just don't have a lot of confidence she will win the fight, so I'm not going to have a ton of exposure to her either. But I don't expect there to be a ton of exposure to either of these fighters, so this could be one of those sneaky fights where, who knows, maybe Kim with that reach advantage and size advantage is able to dominate Grasso standing. Don't expect it, but you know, it's a tournament play. Jeon Kim, I don't think will have a ton of ownership. Again, I'm not going to have too much exposure to either one of those fighters in DraftKings. So we'll move on to the next fight on the main card, which is a fight between Ricardo Lamas and UFC newcomer Bill Algeo. Bill Algeo is taking this fight on short notice. For Ricardo Lamas, he is 2-3, or actually, yeah, 2-3 in his 5 most recent UFC fights. He's got victories over Darren Elkins. He was able to finish him with some nasty ground and pound. He also has a victory against Jason Knight, who is no longer in the UFC. But he has some pretty brutal losses. He was knocked out by Calvin Kattar. He was knocked out by Josh Emmett. He lost a split decision close fight to Mirsad Bektic. Ricardo Lamas has always been a ranked fighter in that featherweight 145-pound division, but he's had trouble with the top guys. For Bill Algeo, making his UFC debut here, he was on the Contender Series, and he lost a fight that went the distance to Brendan Lugane, or again, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that name correctly, but so he's got a little bit of octagon experience. His most recent fight took place just 2 weeks ago. It's very recent. Tim Dooling won that fight, went the distance in the CFFC. And here's a guy that he's got some finishes on his resume here. He's got a finish over John DeJesus, rear naked choke. He's got a knockout switch kick finish against Scott Heckman, who had a record of 27-8. So the thing that I want to talk about in this fight is the size and reach advantage that Bill Algeo has. So he's about 4 inches taller, and he's got like a 3.5 inch reach advantage against compared to Ricardo Lamas. Ricardo Lamas should win this fight, needs to win this fight, especially with the lack of success that he has had recently. But I like Bill Algeo in this fight as a pretty big underdog. I mean, I'm going to pull up the odds here. Ricardo Lamas is minus 290. Algeo is plus 245. Now, I had a chance to watch some of Algeo's most recent fights, and there were some things that I could take away from those fights that I really liked. One of those things is the guy seems to be a high output fighter. He's a guy that really likes to put on pressure. The other thing is he's a pretty well-rounded fighter, right? He can finish you with submissions. He can finish you with striking. And the fact that Ricardo Lamas is coming off of really a brutal knockout, I know it was a year ago against Calvin Kattar, and I'm not saying that Bill Algeo is on the same level of Calvin Kattar, but he's built very similarly. And the pressure, volume, and striking that he can bring to the table is similar to how Calvin Kattar fights. So I think Algeo is a live dog in this fight, and therefore I really like him in DraftKings as one of the cheapest fighters on the slate at only a $7,000 price point. I think there's a chance that he could pull off an upset. Maybe Lamas is on the way out. I mean, he is 38 years old. And for Ricardo Lamas, priced all the way up at 9,200, I don't love it. I think there's better fighters to target if you're going to spend that amount of money, right? Like, he only put up 6 points against Kattar. He had that 103-point victory against Elkins, 22 against Bektic, 9 against Emmett, 122 against Knight. I mean, this guy's fought everyone. He's fought Max Holloway. He's fought Charles Oliveira. He's fought Chad Mendes. But the one thing that we've seen from Lamas is it's a guy that he's susceptible to being knocked out. He was KO'd by Kattar, KO'd by Emmett. He was KO'd by Chad Mendes. So who knows here? Maybe Bill Algeo is the guy that can break the slate, get a knockout against Lamas. And I don't expect him to be very high owned, especially because he's taking this fight on short notice. One of the other things that I want to talk about when it comes to Algeo is he's never been knocked out. He's been finished twice in his professional career, but both of those were submissions. And one of them was against Shane Burgos. So, I mean, this guy has fought some tough competition. he's no slouch. Like, I've seen people on the Tapology forum say that he's a can, and I just don't buy into that. So I'll have some exposure to Algeo, no exposure to Lamas. So I want to move on to the last fight here on the main card, which is a fight between Magomed Ankalaev versus Jan Cutelaba. These guys were actually scheduled to fight a couple weeks ago. That got pushed off. I believe Cutelaba tested positive for COVID, or one of his cornermen did. Either way, I broke down that fight not too long ago, and if you guys tuned in to that video, you would know that I'm a big Ankalaev fan. I like Cutelaba's aggression. He's a powerful striker, but I just don't see anything that Cutelaba does better than Ankalaev. I think Ankalaev is a better grappler. I think Ankalaev is a better striker, especially from a technical standpoint. I mean, you might be able to give the power edge to Cutelaba, but that's really about it. For the purpose of this video, I'm not going to break down all the stats. If you're interested in getting into that type of stuff, you can always look up the stats yourself or check out my previous video where I did break down this fight. But these guys did fight before 5 months ago. It was a little bit of a controversial ending. Ankalaev knocked out Cutelaba. Cutelaba recovered very quickly. It almost seemed like Cutelaba was like pretending or baiting Ankalaev to push forward that he was hurt. He claimed he wasn't. And subsequent, like the good thing about this fight is we're gonna really see, hopefully, whether or not that was the case, right? If Ankalaev comes back out here and finishes Cutelaba again, then we can put this fight to rest. Ankalaev is a big favorite on this card at -335. In fact, he is one of the biggest favorites, and again, I really like him here. I love him in DraftKings as well. His price point is $9,000, but if you look, this guy's been a solid performer in every fight that he's had in the UFC. 94 points against Cutelaba, 85 points against Lou Jambula, 66 against Abreu, 106 against Prachnio. And again, his only loss was that third round submission where he was subbed by Paul Craig. He still put up 49 points in that fight, and that was like a Hail Mary submission. For Cutelaba, he's not a bad play in tournaments at that 7,200 price just because he does have some finishes on his record. He finished De Silva, he finished Antigulov, he finished Khalil Roundtree, and in those fights he eclipsed that 100 point mark. I just don't see it here. I don't think he finishes Ankalaev, but again, he's not the worst person to throw in your lineup at 7,200 because he has the power to end this fight. This is a fight that you should be targeting. You have two strikers, guys with finishing potential and some power. Ankalaev has some of the nicest spinning kick techniques in the UFC. So I'll have a ton of exposure to Ankalaev. I might even have some contrarian lineups where I get a little bit of exposure to Cutelaba, but again, really siding with Ankalaev in this fight. Okay, moving on to our featured prelim, which is a fight that's taking place in the middleweight division between Maki Pitolo versus Impa Kasanganay, or Kasanganay. Tough name to pronounce. Either way, Maki Pitolo, let's start off with him, man. I mean, he's been super active since debuting in the UFC. I think this is now like his third fight in the past 3 months. He is 1-2 in the UFC thus far. His UFC debut, he lost the fight to Callum Potter. That was a fight that he really looked good in and just gassed. He was able to knock out Charles Byrd 2 months ago, and then he just fought like 2 or 3 weeks ago against Darren Stewart and was subbed early on in that fight, guillotine choke. 13-6 professional record, and what Coconut Bombs Maki Pitolo is known for is those heavy strikes. For Impa Kasanganay, this guy's got a professional record of 7-0, and he's been a prospect for the UFC now. I mean, he's had 2 fights on the Contender Series. Both of those fights went the distance. He beat Kalen Hill. He also beat Anthony Adams. Kalen Hill had a record of 4-0 at the time. Anthony Adams had a record of 8-1. Before that, he fought in LFA. Had victories over Devorius Tubbs. This is a guy that's got some finishes too, some submissions, some knockouts, things that I really like to see. And I think he's a pretty big time prospect here. So this fight is one I'm definitely interested in tuning in for. Let's look at the betting odds for Kasanganay. He's the favorite at -125. Pitolo's +105. I love Kasanganay in this fight. He's a guy that I'm kind of drinking the Kool-Aid on. There's 2 fighters on this card that I'm really looking forward to seeing fight. Kasanganay is one of them, and Sean Brady is the other, which we'll definitely talk about. And Kasanganay is a guy that can make a statement here. Now, I'm able to pull up some stats for both of these fighters. Let's talk about Kasanganay's stats first. 5.53 significant strikes landed per minute, 58% striking accuracy, 2.77 strikes absorbed, 2.5 takedowns per 15, 100% takedown accuracy, 66% takedown defense. For Maki Pitolo, 4.95 strikes landed per minute, 45% striking accuracy, 3 strikes absorbed, 2.27 takedown average, 66% takedown accuracy, 42% takedown defense. So this is another fight where, and the stats really make sense to me. I feel like Kasanganay has an advantage in striking. He has an advantage in grappling. And, again, I can't write off Pitolo 100% because he does have some power in those hands. But man, this guy's really stayed active as of late. Coming off of a loss where he was finished. It wasn't like he was knocked out, but just don't really like Maki Pitolo in this fight. And really the reason for that is because Kasanganay, I think, is just as likely to finish Maki Pitolo when it comes to striking. And when it comes to their jiu-jitsu skills, I think Kasanganay has an advantage there. He's got an advantage in grappling as well. So I don't want to rule out the fact that Pitolo could potentially knock out Kasanganay. I just don't see it. I think he's the smarter fighter as well. He's the more technical fighter. He has the better gas tank. So for all of those reasons, I really like Kasanganay. I want to break down this fight when it comes to DraftKings. Kasanganay is 8,500, and I like that price point, especially with the finishing potential. For me this week, it was a toss-up because it's like, hey, do you pay 8,500 for Kasanganay, or do you pay 8,600 for Neil Magny, 8,400 for Zach Cummings? I think the guy with the most point potential is clearly Kasanganay, which means I'm going to have a lot of exposure to him. For Maki Pitolo, 7,700. I think he's a guy that's going to get some love. I don't expect to have a ton of exposure to him for all the reasons that I just mentioned. But I think he's going to be a guy that's owned at a decent clip in these tournaments because he does have that finishing potential, right? Like what we saw against Charles Byrd. I'm going to be staying away from him, but he's not a bad tournament play. I just will have a ton of exposure to Kasanganay. So we'll move on to the next fight on the prelims here, which is a fight that is taking place in the strawweight division between Mallory Martin and Hannah Cifers. We'll start with Hannah Cifers, who is now a UFC veteran at this point. She's 2-3 in her 5 most recent fights, but she's on a 3-fight losing streak. She was subbed by Maria Agapova. She was subbed by Mackenzie Dern. She was knocked out by Angela Hill. Those are some tough fights there. She does have victories over Jodie Escobel and Polyana Viana. I've watched a lot of Hannah Cifers. She's been pretty active. This is now going to be her 5th fight in the past year. And I'm not impressed. I'm not impressed at all with her skills. For Mallory Martin, on the flip side, 6-3 professional record. This will be her second UFC fight. She had a tough draw on her UFC debut against Verna Jandiroba and was subbed. But before that, she was on a nice little 4-fight win streak, 3 victories. Well, 2 victories in the Contender Series, Invicta, 1 victory in the Contender Series, and 1 victory in LFA. So she's fought some solid competition. Mallory Martin is the pretty big favorite in this fight, minus 325. Cyphers is plus 265. The reason why Mallory Martin is a favorite here is because of some of her grappling skills, right? 3.53 takedowns per 15 minutes and a 62% takedown accuracy. Now, her takedown defense is only 25%. That's not great, but she's going to be the bigger fighter in this fight as well. She's got a 3-inch reach advantage. She's got a 1-inch reach advantage as well. I don't think she'll have trouble taking down Hannah Cyphers. I mean, Cyphers' 66% takedown defense isn't bad, but it's not really good either. I don't think she'll have trouble taking down Cyphers in this fight. If it needs to go there, I don't think it even really needs to go there because I feel as though Mallory Martin has a striking advantage as well. So I like Martin in this fight. Would I be willing to bet on this fight? Absolutely not. With these female fights, they're always wild cards. A lot of times they have an impact on DFS as well, which is annoying. But yeah, I'm going to stay away from this fight, really, in both realms. Mallory Martin's 8,900. Don't love her there in DFS, and I just would never feel comfortable having Hannah Cyphers in my lineup either. 6 points against Agapova, 4 against Stern, 23 against Hill. Just not a ton of potential. Finishing potential is really what it comes down to. She has no victories by finish in the UFC. Don't expect to see that to change here. So this will be a hard pass for me. I will be fading this fight altogether. No exposure to either fighters. So we'll move on to the next fight, which is taking place in the middleweight division. This is a fight between Zach Cummings and Alessio Di Chirico. Alessio Di Chirico is the Italian fighter, of course. He is 2-3 in his 5 most recent UFC fights. He's got some losses. I mean, he got beat by Kevin Holland. Now, he did go the distance in that fight. He also lost to Mahmoud Muradov. Also a sub by Eric Spicely. His victories, he finished Olawale Bambagos, and he had a split decision victory against Julian Marquez, which is probably his most impressive victory in the UFC. For Zach Cummings, he's 3-2 in his 5 most recent fights. Lost the fight about a year ago to Amari Akhmedov. He also has a loss to Michel Prazeres. Split decision victory, that was a close one. But he's got some victories on his record here. He subbed Trevin Giles. He has a victory over Trevor Smith. Submission victory over Nathan Coy. I mean, Cummings has been in the UFC for quite a while now. The thing with Cummings is he's a good fighter. He'll never be an elite fighter. I don't think he's athletic enough. And all of his losses in the UFC have come to really tough competition, right? Like, he lost to Gunnar Nelson. He lost to Santiago Ponzinibbio. He lost to Amari Akhmedov. But I don't put a guy like Di Chirico in the same breath as those guys. So that naturally makes me want to lean Zach Cummings here. Like, he's just kind of like the wily veteran, that seasoned veteran that you don't want to rule him out. Like, outside of his fight against Ponzinibbio, which took place, not Ponzinibbio, I meant Gunnar Nelson, where he was choked out in the 2nd round. That took place in 2014. I mean, this is a guy that went the distance with Santiago Ponzinibbio. He's got skills, man. Now, does he have a ton of finish potential? Not necessarily. He has some submission victories on his record, and he's got guillotine chokes, arm locks, rear naked choke victories, Darce victories. haven't really seen him put too many people out with punches or strikes. He did beat Dominique Steele all the way back in 2015. He was able to finish him. So I like Cummings in this fight. If I'm looking at the Vegas odds, Cummings is actually the underdog at -105, which it doesn't surprise me that much because this is a guy that you can really easily rule out because he's not the flashiest fighter. But I just don't think DiCirico, his victories in the UFC thus far against Marquez and Bambagos and Gareth McClellan, these guys aren't on the same level as Zach Cummings. Any fighter that loses to Eric Spicely, like he did, now I know that was a few years ago, but that scares me. Like if Spicely's able to finish you, and he should have had a huge striking advantage in that fight, and he just didn't take advantage of it. So, I really like Cummings in this fight. When it comes to DraftKings, this is another one that's similar to Robbie Lawler and Neil Magny, right? I feel strongly about Cummings, but do I want to pay $8,400 for Cummings? And the answer to that question is no, because again, doesn't have a ton of output, doesn't have a ton of finishing potential. 9 points against Akhmedov, 72 against Giles, 71 against Smith, 14 against Prazeres. I mean, he's got that victory against Steele, that victory against Coy, where he had some finishes and was able to cross that 100-point threshold. But for the most part, I expect anywhere from high 60s to mid 70s out of Cummings, which isn't exciting for me in tournaments. More of a cash play. For DiCirico, never crossed the 100-point threshold. His best performance ever was against Gareth McClellan, where he put up 93 points. He's got some stinkers in there. 1 against Spicely, 46 against Velekovic, 36 against Holland, 18 against Miradov. I just don't, this isn't a fight that I want to target because I think it's going to go the distance, regardless of the outcome. And they're not huge output fighters. So I will be fading this fight. DiCirico is not a bad cash underdog to play because he's the actual favorite in this fight. He's the younger fighter. For some reason on DraftKings, he's priced down at $7,800, but again, in tournaments, I will be avoiding both fighters. Actually, I might have a little bit of Cummings, but that's just because I'm a degenerate and I play in a lot of fights. Or I play in a lot of games. So we'll move on to the next fight here. Second fight on the prelims is a fight in the strawweight division between Emily Whitmire and Polyana Viana. This is the fight that I was at least looking forward to breaking down. I have no idea who's going to win this fight. I mean, Emily Whitmire, 4-3 professional record. She is 2-2 in the UFC. She also lost to Roxanne Modafferi on The Ultimate Fighter. So her victories were against Alexandra Albu, I don't even believe is in the UFC any longer, Jamie Moyle. Her losses were to Amanda Hebas, expected, and Jillian Robertson. I mean, she was subbed by both those girls. For Polyana Viana, she's on a 3-fight losing skid after winning in her UFC debut to Maya Stevenson, who's no longer even in the UFC. Her losses were to Veronica Macedo. She was subbed. She lost to Hannah Cyphers, split decision, close fight, and she lost to JJ Aldrich. Both these fighters are really decision merchants. They don't have a ton of finishes on their resume. I mean, I guess I would give the edge to Polyana Viana because she's used to fighting bigger fighters. She's a girl that has fought at flyweight before, 125. She's also going to have a 4-inch reach advantage. For Viana, I think she definitely has better jiu-jitsu skills, so if this fight goes to the mat, she'll have an advantage there. When it comes to striking, I think it's pretty neutral. And the odds state as much, right? Like, Emily Whitmire is a -150 favorite. but I would never be comfortable betting that. Like, I would be much more comfortable taking the underdog in this one. So again, this is a fight that I just don't think that you should be targeting when it comes to DFS. I mean, Viana 8,000, Whitmire 8,200. I mean, it's just not worth it. I mean, these girls are averaging 45 fantasy points per fight in the UFC. Whitmire's got that 103 point outlier where she subbed Albu, and other than that, she's just been undesirable. For Viana, same thing. Her UFC debut where she subbed Stevenson, 118 points. Other than that, you're looking 9, 39, 31. This fight's not going to have a lot of ownership either. So, you know, if you're going to play cash, I mean, Viana's not bad at 8,000, but I'd rather take Trico at 7,800. I'd probably even rather take Robbie Lawler at 7,600. I'd certainly rather take Anthony Smith at 7,500. For tournaments, this is just a fight you stay away from. There's just not a ton of potential. I say that, but what's going to end up happening is Viana will probably end up subbing Whitmire, and I'll look like an idiot. So, again, with the female fights, continue to fade me, but I'm just going to stay away from them because I'm tired of being on the wrong end of them. So last fight, which is the first fight on this card, is a fight between Sean Brady and Christian Aguilera, which is taking place in the welterweight division. We'll start with the undefeated professional Sean Brady, 12-0. I've already mentioned earlier in this video that I'm really looking forward to watching Sean Brady fight. I mean, he is 2-0 in the UFC so far. He fought Court McGee, who's a tough guy to get out of there. That one went the distance, but he looked really good in that one. He also fought Ismail Nordiev, another guy that's not a slouch, had a record of 19-3. He won that fight. But before that, man, he had victories in LFA, CFFC. He's got really good hands, really good grappling. He's got that wrestling base. He's a guy that I'm really high on. And again, another guy that I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. For Christian Aguilera, he's on a nice little 3-fight win streak. He's only had one UFC fight where he knocked out Anthony Ivy, and that fight took place like 2.5 months ago. Before that, he had a victory in LFA against Glaucio Elizario. Had a victory against Krzysztof Kulak, who I don't really know too much about. Does have a couple losses on his resume. He has been knocked out before. And, you know, he's a big underdog in this fight. It makes sense because Sean Brady looks like a hot prospect and a guy at the UFC should really consider promoting. And the thing with Aguilera is you watch his style. He's a guy that likes to trade, right? And I don't know if Sean Brady is the guy that you want to trade with. I do want to go over the stats in this fight. And we'll look at Brady first. 5.53 strikes landed per minute, 55% accuracy, 4.8 strikes absorbed, 3 takedowns per 15 minutes, 50% takedown accuracy, 100% takedown defense. Now, with Aguilera's stats, it's only one fight, 10 strikes landed per minute, 43% striking accuracy, 4 strikes absorbed. And we haven't seen any grappling from Aguilera in the UFC thus far. I've watched both these fighters, though, and I can tell you that Sean Brady is the better striker than Christian Aguilera, and he is certainly the better wrestler. So I think this is a fight where I wouldn't be shocked if Brady is able to finish him early. If he's not able to finish Aguilera early, it's all good, right? Because he's got that wrestling base that he can rely on. So I really like Sean Brady. He's priced up. He's the most expensive fighter on the slate. It makes sense from a DraftKings perspective because he's put up 110 against McGee, 92 against Nordiev. We've seen a lot of output from him. And again, he's a guy that I want to pay up for. He's a better option than Alexa Grasso. He's a better option than Mallory Martin. He's a better option than Ricardo Lamas. When it comes to Christian Aguilera, he's the cheapest fighter on the card. And, the difficult thing here is Christian Aguilera. I mean, he did have that knockout in his most recent victory. He's going to be a sneaky tournament play, but I don't expect to have a lot of exposure to him because I just don't see a path to victory. So I will be fading Christian Aguilera. But again, if you want a sneaky little tournament dart throw, he's not horrible, but we just haven't seen anything from Sean. I'd rather have Jeong Kim. I'd rather have young Cutelaba at those low price points than Christian Aguilera in my lineup. And that's just me. All right, so we're moving on to everyone's favorite segment, the money-making segment here. Let's go over what my lineup is going to be looking like this weekend for DraftKings. We're going to start at the top here with the priciest fighter in my lineup, which is Magomed Ankalaev. 9,000, the output's there, right? We've seen him put up 94, 85, 106 points. He's already finished Cutelaba before. I expect him to do that again here. Cutelaba has a little bit of a suspect chin, man. We've seen him be finished in the UFC. So we'll start off with Ankalaev, and then we'll move on to Alexander Rakic. So Rakic is at 8,700. I think he can finish Anthony Smith here. I really do. I just think that he's the fresher, younger fighter. He's a better striker. And hoping to take advantage of that, get an early finish there. Next fighter we're going to take is Neil Magny. Didn't love him at 8,600. I talked about how earlier I don't plan to have a ton of exposure to him, but in this lineup, I have to. The way I'm constructing it, I got to be honest, I'm not impressed with a lot of the underdogs on this card. So it made it a little bit difficult. And as you're seeing, this is a card that I'm kind of playing the mids. I don't have a ton of the high-priced fighters. So I like Magny because I think he can get a victory here. And, he can put up anywhere from 75 to 95 points in a victory. We'll move on to the next fighter, which is Impa Kasanganay. Already talked him up, man. I just think he's overall the better fighter compared to his opponent, Maki Pitolo. And it would be nice if Kasanganay could get a finish here. I think there's a possibility of that, and it could be via submission or strikes. Move on to the next fighter here, which is Polyana Viana. And I talked about how I really don't want to have a ton of exposure to this fight, but it was difficult for me to avoid these female fights. And I think she's reasonably priced at 8,000. I guess you could argue that Di Chirico may be a better option. But, I have Kasanganay in my lineup, so I'm not going to stack that fight and have Pitolo. I'm not going to have Robbie Lawler when I have Magny. I'm not going to have Anthony Smith when I have Rakic. So it really gave me limited options. And Viana, I think, could sub Whitmire. So, maybe I'll be on the right side for once of these female fights. And then the last fighter here is Bill Algeo. I just think he's one of the livest, cheap dogs, best dart throw on this slate because Lamas's chin is suspect at this point, and Algeo fights with a lot of pace, a lot of pressure, and some solid output. So that's my lineup. I don't know if I'm 100% enthused with it, but it is a different construction than you generally see from me, and maybe that's what I need. I would have really loved to have been able to get Sean Brady in this lineup. I would have really loved to have been able to get Alex Caceres in this lineup, but that fight has been scrapped. That fight against Giga Chikadze that was originally scheduled. I just feel like my hands were tied a little bit here with putting together this lineup. But I'm due. The past 2 weeks I've been really 50-50. What I'm betting in DFS is basically what I'm making back. So this is the week where we're going to win some tournaments like I was doing a little bit earlier. So good luck, everyone, with this weekend's card. It should be a good one relative to the past couple cards that we've had, or UFC Fight Nights, that is. And keep on winning that money. See you guys.